Welcome back to the deep dive. I want to start today by asking you to perform a little mental reset for us.
Always a good way to start.
Right. Because we all have these file folders in our heads. They're labeled with things like politics or economic science and, of course, religion.
Right, the standard categories.
Exactly. And usually when we pull out that religion file, we sort of expect to find things like prayer beads, maybe meditation, some rituals, maybe some arguments about the afterlife or what you can and can't eat. It's very personal.
It is. It's highly subjective.
Yeah.
That's the standard operating procedure for how we categorize the world. Religion goes directly into the feelings and beliefs box.
Yeah, the feelings box. But the stack of research we have on the desk today, it basically takes that religion file, dumps the contents straight into the shredder, and then tries to stuff the empty folder into the political science cabinet.
It really does. It's a total paradigm shift.
We are looking at the works of Ghulam Ahmed Pervez. He's a mid-20th century thinker who is frankly a bit of a firebrand in these texts. Specifically, we're analyzing his breakdown of Surah al-Baqarah, verse 62. And to put it bluntly, the source material argues that everything we think defines Islam might be completely wrong.
It is a radical inversion of the status quo. The central thesis we're exploring today is that Islam, according to Pervez's writings, was never intended to be a religion in the traditional sense. In fact, he argues that religion with a capital R is actually the enemy of what Islam was supposed to be.
Okay, that is a headline-grabbing statement. Religion is the enemy.
Yeah.
But if you walked into a mosque or a church today and said that, you'd probably get kicked out immediately.
You absolutely would. But to understand his point, we really have to adopt his vocabulary, because he isn't saying God doesn't exist. He's saying that the structure we call religion, which he terms mazhab, is a corruption.
The corruption of what exactly?
Of the original message. He argues that the prophets didn't come to start religions, they didn't come to teach people how to pray better, they came to install a civilizational operating system, which he calls deen.
An operating system, like we're swabbing out Windows for Linux, but for an entire society.
That is the exact analogy the sources lean into heavily. Think of it this way. A religion is something you practice to save your own soul. An operating system is something you run to manage the hardware of the state and society.
Okay, so mazhab versus deen.
Exactly. The core conflict in this material is mazhab versus deen. The sources argue we've completely misunderstood the mission of the prophets by viewing them as just holy men in robes. Pervez views them as revolutionaries bringing a constitution for a state.
So our mission today for this deep dive is to unpack this specific distinction. We're going to see how this interpretation completely changes the definitions of salvation and faith and governance. We're moving from subjective spirituality, like do I feel close to God, to objective sociopolitical mechanics. Does the system actually work?
Right. And for you listening right now, I would say put your preconceived notions on pause. Whether you are deeply religious or a staunch atheist, this argument is just fascinating because it frames theology as political science.
It turns the metaphysical into the mechanical.
Perfectly said, yes.
Okay, let's get into the nitty-gritty of this because we need to define these terms properly. Pervez uses them essentially as battering rams. Let's start with the villain of his story, mazhab. Now, in Urdu or Arabic, mazhab is usually just the standard word for religion.
It is.
But Pervez loads it with a very specific, very negative connotation.
He does. In the source material, mazhab represents the privatization of faith. Pervez defines mazhab as a system of private beliefs, individual rituals, like counting prayer beads, meditation, chanting, and it has a primary focus on individual salvation.
It's the me and God silo.
Precisely. It's subjective. If you ask someone following a mazhab why they believe what they believe, the answer is usually based on dogma, like, I believe because I was told to by my parents or I feel it in my heart.
Right. It's inherited. You're born into it.
Yeah, exactly. And crucially, the payoff of mazhab is entirely post-mortem. You suffer through this life, you do your daily rituals, and you get a reward after you die.
Okay, let me play devil's advocate for a second here. What is actually wrong with that? If I want to sit in my room and pray and be a good person and just hope for heaven, why does the source material have a problem with me? That sounds like a very peaceful, harmless existence.
Well, Pervez would argue that while it might be peaceful for you personally, it is disastrous for humanity as a whole.
Disastrous?
Yes. The critique in the text is that mazhab inherently divides humanity into warring tribes. Think about it. If my truth is based on my subjective feeling and your truth is based on your subjective feeling, we have no objective common ground. We can't actually verify who is right.
Because it relies on blind faith.
Exactly, blind faith. And because it's usually inherited, it creates these exclusive clubs. I'm a Jew, I'm a Muslim, I'm a Christian. It becomes entirely about identity politics rather than universal truth.
So it becomes a label you wear on your shirt rather than the thing you actually do in the world.
That's it. And while you are busy trying to save your individual soul in your quiet room, the world outside is burning. Purvey argues that mazhab acts like an opiate. It makes you tolerate injustice and poverty in this life because you're entirely focused on the next one.
Which brings us to the challenger in this ring, Dean.
Deen is defined in the text as the system. It is an objective socio-political system of life.
We keep using this Constitution analogy. Let's really drill into that for a minute.
Sure, so think of Deen not as a church or a mosque, but as a state constitution. A constitution isn't something you just believe in privately in your heart. It's something you live under publicly.
It's enforced.
It's collective.
Yeah.
It is verifiable. And most importantly, its entire focus is on results in this current life.
Results like what exactly? What is the promise of the Deen according to these texts?
The text is very specific and honestly incredibly bold. It says the core purpose of the Deen is to eliminate hunger, eliminate fear, and ensure human dignity.
Wow. That is a very tangible checklist. So if mazhab promises you heaven after you die, Deen promises you a society where literally no one starves while you're alive.
Exactly. The core argument Pervez makes is that the prophets Moses, Jesus, Muhammad, they didn't come to teach people how to pray better or how to meditate. They came to establish this Deen, this counter system to worldly tyranny.
But over time, the followers messed it up.
Yes. According to the text, the followers corrupted it. They took the Constitution and they turned it into a religion. They took a collective revolutionary political movement and shrank it down into private individual rituals.
That is a massive accusation to make. It basically says that what billions of people practice today as religion is a corrupted file. It's a total downgrade from the original software.
It creates a very strict binary opposition. You are either following the Deen, the system, or you are following mazhab. And the sources are adamant that you cannot do both. You can't run two entirely different operating systems on the same hard drive at the same time.
Okay, I want to push back on this idea of righteous deeds, because in the religious world, being a quote-unquote good person is usually the gold standard. You know, be kind, give to charity, don't lie. But Pervez seems to think that's just not enough.
It's not enough at all in his framework.
The source material uses this analogy about traffic laws that I found honestly a bit jarring when I first read it.
It is jarring, and it is meant to be jarring. It's the traffic law analogy, and it is absolutely central to understanding why Pervez thinks personal goodness is completely irrelevant without the system.
Okay, lay it out for us. How does this work?
Pervez asks us to imagine a country. Every country has a constitution and laws, right?
Sure. Basic societal rules.
So imagine a country where the system requires you to drive on the left side of the road, like in the UK or Japan.
Okay, standard traffic law, driving on the left.
Now imagine a driver who insists on driving on the right side of the road. He is just cruising down the right lane directly into oncoming traffic. But when the police finally stop him, this driver argues, hey, wait a minute. I am a good person.
I'm a good person. While driving into traffic.
Yes. He says, I give to charity. I pray every single night. I have wonderful intentions. I love my neighbors. I never lie. I am a saintly figure in my private life.
But he's driving on the wrong side of the road.
Exactly. So the question Pervez poses is simple. Is he a good citizen?
Well, technically, no. He's a hazard. He's a criminal. He's about to cause a massive head-on collision.
But he has a good heart. He prays.
It doesn't matter. In the context of the road, his private virtues don't save him from being a public menace.
That is exactly the verdict in the source material. Under a system view, this person is a criminal regardless of their private virtues. Their personal piety, their goodness in a religious sense is completely irrelevant because they're actively violating the fundamental operating system of the state.
But hold on a second. This analogy suggests that if I'm living in a system that I disagree with, or if I'm just trying to be a good person in a bad world, my goodness doesn't even count. That feels incredibly cold and bureaucratic. It sounds like he's saying if you don't have the right party membership card, your charity doesn't matter.
You're hitting on the exact tension Pervez wants to highlight. He's not saying charity is bad. He's saying that individual acts of kindness cannot compensate for a broken or ignored public system.
Right.
If the divine constitution, the Deen, has specific laws about economics and justice and governance, You cannot be considered righteous if you are violating or ignoring that public system, no matter how many private rituals you perform in your bedroom.
So sitting in a room praying with rosary beads doesn't make you good if you're living in a system of mass exploitation and you're doing absolutely nothing to change that system.
Precisely. It completely redefines the term amal salih, which is usually translated as righteous deeds.
Right. Usually a Sali is just the be nice stuff. Don't steal, help old ladies cross the street.
In the mazhab view, yes. But in the Deen view, amal salih means actions that align with and support the divine constitution. It is a strictly legalistic definition. Just as a citizen is only good if they uphold the state's constitution, a human is only righteous if they uphold the divine law.
So good deeds are literally measured by their utility to the collective system.
Yes. The phrase the texts use is nafa al-nas, benefiting humanity. If your action doesn't help the collective system function and protect people from hunger and fear, it is not a righteous deed. It might be a nice personal gesture, but in the grand scheme of the system, it's basically just a hobby.
It's just a hobby. That is devastating. It frames personal spirituality as almost selfish.
The text explicitly challenges the selfishness of personal salvation. It argues that thinking I need to save my own soul is a purely mazhab mindset. It's egocentric. The Deen mindset is sociocentric. It asks, how do we secure the society?
This entire framework really comes to a head when we look at the specific verse involved here, Surah al-Baqarah, verse 62. Now, this verse is famous because it usually seems to be the ultimate argument for religious tolerance.
It is the pivot point of the entire argument. Let me read the standard translation of the verse so we have it clearly in mind.
Please do.
It says, indeed, those who believe, meaning the Muslims and those who are Jews and the Christians and the Sabians, whoever believes in Allah on the last day and does good deeds will have their reward with their Lord. And no fear will there be concerning them, nor will they grieve.
Okay, let's pause right there. On the surface, that sounds incredibly inclusive. It lists all these different groups, Muslims, Jews, Christians, Sabians, and basically says, hey, as long as you believe in God and the last day and do good stuff, you're safe. No fear, you get the reward.
That is the most common interpretation. It's often called universalism or the unity of religions view.
It's the many paths up the same mountain theory.
Exactly. And the sources highlight historical figures who strongly champion this view, specifically Mahatma Gandhi and Abul Kalam Azad.
Azad was a huge figure.
A monumental figure in Indian history, a brilliant scholar, contemporary of Gandhi. He wrote a famous commentary called Tarjuman al-Quran, where he argued exactly this point.
And this wasn't just theological musing for them, right?
Yeah.
This had a very urgent political purpose at the time.
Absolutely, it did. We have to remember the historical context here. This is India before partition. You had hundreds of millions of Hindus, Muslims, Sikhs, Christians, all sharing the land. The goal of leaders like Gandhi and Azad was to build a composite Indian nationalism.
They needed unity.
They needed a theology that said, we are all one. If all religions are equally valid paths to the exact same God, then it doesn't really matter if you're Hindu or Muslim or Christian. We can all just be good Indians together and get along.
It sounds lovely. Honestly, it sounds like the perfect solution to communal violence. But Pervez, he really doesn't like this interpretation, does he?
He fundamentally rejects it. And it's not just because he disagrees with the politics, though we'll definitely get to that. It's because he thinks it breaks the core logic of the system.
How so? If everyone is being good, why is that a problem for the system?
Because of the traffic analogy again. He argues that universalism is a trap. If driving on the left is true and driving on the right is also true, you don't have a functional traffic system anymore.
You have chaos.
You have a massive pileup. Pervez argues that the verse isn't saying all these religions are valid at all. He argues it is actually rejecting the concept of inherited salvation.
Inherited salvation, meaning I'm safe because my dad was a Muslim.
Exactly, the birthright argument. The Jews at the time believed they were the chosen people simply by birth. Many Muslims today believe that just being named Muhammad or Ali and being born in a Muslim house automatically gets you into heaven. It's a club membership mentality.
I have the VIP card, so I get into the lounge, regardless of how I act.
Right. Pervez argues this verse is literally ripping up all the membership cards. He says the verse is addressing these groups, Jews, Christians, Muslims, and saying, listen, being born a Jew, a Christian, or even a Muslim guarantees you absolutely nothing.
So instead of saying everyone is right, it's actually saying none of you are safe just because of your label.
Correct. It shifts the entire paradigm from club membership to compliance. The source argues the verse is actually demanding that all these groups, even the ones currently calling themselves Muslims, must accept the current divine law to achieve salvation.
Wait. Current divine law. That sounds like a pretty big loophole. The verse says, whoever believes in Allah in the last day. It doesn't explicitly say whoever follows the Quran.
And here is where Pervez's system logic really kicks into high gear. He argues that believing in Allah isn't just a mental acknowledgement that a creator God exists. It means believing in the authority of Allah. And where is that authority actually found?
In his laws.
In his current laws. The source argues that previous scriptures, the Torah, the Gospel, they originally contained the deen. They were the valid operating systems for their specific historical times.
Right.
But according to the source, and this is a pretty standard Islamic theological position, those texts were corrupted, altered, or simply lost by their followers over the centuries.
The files were corrupted. The old versions of Windows are just no longer supported by the developer.
Exactly. The operating system crashed because the underlying code was tampered with. Pervez argues the Quran remains the only uncorrupted constitution available today. Therefore, when the verse says, whoever believes in Allah, it strongly implies believing in the only version of Allah's law that is currently valid, intact, and unaltered.
So it's an open invitation, sure, but it's an invitation to join one specific system. It's not stay where you are and just be a good person. It's come over here and follow this specific law.
That's his interpretation. It is universal in access. Literally anyone can join, regardless of their ethnic or religious background. But it is entirely exclusive in practice. You have to follow the specific constitution to get the results.
That brings us to a really difficult question, though. If you can't just say, I believe, and have that be enough, and if your private good intentions aren't enough, how do you actually know if this system is true? How do you verify it without just taking it on faith?
This is, in my opinion, the most modern and compelling part of Pervez's entire argument. He introduces what he calls the pragmatic test.
The pragmatic test.
Yeah.
That sounds very scientific.
He identifies a major problem with religion. It relies entirely on blind faith. You cannot prove your religion is true until you die. If I say doing this specific ritual will get you into a beautiful heaven, you literally have to wait until you're dead to find out if I was lying to you.
Right. It's the ultimate delayed gratification. Just wait until the afterlife. You'll see I was right all along.
Pervez says that is absolutely not how Deen works. Deen treats human society as a laboratory.
A laboratory.
He compares the divine system to a chemical formula. If I tell you mixing 2 parts hydrogen and 1 part oxygen creates water, I don't need you to have faith in me. I don't need you to chant my name or worship me. I just need you to go to the lab and run the experiment yourself.
And if you get water, the formula is demonstrably true. If you get a fiery explosion, the formula or your execution of it was wrong.
Exactly. The source argues that the Deen is a sociological formula. If you implement the specific economic and political laws of the system, specific results must occur. It is pure cause and effect.
And what are those results? What is the water in this societal experiment?
The complete elimination of hunger and the complete elimination of fear.
That is a very high bar.
It's an incredibly high bar, but Pervez is absolutely adamant about it. The text says establish this system and no individual will sleep hungry at night. And it adds no human will bow before another.
So the verification standard isn't how many beautiful mosques you have in your city. It's not how many millions of people are fasting during Ramadan. It's not how loud or melodic the call to prayer is.
No, those are just rituals. The verification standard is purely metric-based. Is there poverty? Is there economic exploitation? Is there fear of the state? If a society has poverty, if people are starving in the streets, if people are living in constant fear of tyrants or debt collectors, then that society is demonstrably not following the Deen.
Regardless of what they call themselves on paper.
Regardless. They could call themselves the Islamic Republic of the Brech. Wherever they could have a copy of the Quran in every single hotel room. But if there is hunger, the experiment has failed. Or, more accurately, the formula isn't actually being used. They are faking it.
This really shifts the arena of competition. Because usually we think of Islam competing with Christianity or Buddhism or Judaism. We think of it as a theological competition of my prophet is better or more accurate than your prophet.
But here the competition is entirely with secular systems. The source explicitly states that Islam does not compete with other religions on theology. It competes with capitalism, communism, and democracy on actual tangible results.
It's entering the arena of political ideologies.
Yes. The text lays out the challenge clearly. Capitalism creates massive wealth, but it also creates crushing poverty and inequality. We see that every day. Communism, at least in its historical implementations, promised equality but brutally suppressed human liberty. Democracy, the Western style, counts heads, but it doesn't weigh them. It can easily lead to mob rule or just manipulation by the ultra-wealthy.
And the argument here is that the dean is the superior third way.
That is the ultimate claim. It claims to be the sovereign system of divine governance that perfectly balances human freedom with absolute economic security. And the proof is in the pudding. If it doesn't work, it's not the dean.
This is so radically rational. It almost strips the mysticism out of faith completely. It turns God into a universal law of cause and effect.
It really does, and that leads us perfectly into how Pervez redefines the very vocabulary of faith. Because if you accept this system view, you have to retranslate all the religious words you grew up hearing. You can't use the old dictionary anymore.
Let's go through these. I want to really understand the consequence of these changes for you, the listener, if you're trying to grasp this paradigm.
Yeah.
Let's start with iman or faith.
Traditionally, iman means belief in the unseen. Believing in angels, the afterlife, things you can't touch or prove. It's a feeling of spiritual surrender.
But in the system view?
In the system view, iman is redefined as rational conviction.
Rational conviction. That sounds like something a corporate lawyer would have.
The sources use the Arabic terms aql meaning reason and dalil meaning evidence. They use the scientist analogy again. A scientist believes in a formula not because he loves the formula emotionally, but because he knows the empirical evidence supports it. Iman is the absolute certainty that the system will work if you apply it correctly.
So it's confidence in the plan. It's not, I really hope this works. It's, I know this works because the logic holds up.
Exactly. And even the concept of al-Qaib, which usually translates to the unseen, gets completely reinterpreted. Instead of ghosts or spirits or invisible realms, it refers to the not yet observable future results of a policy.
Like a farmer planting seeds.
Yes, exactly like that. You plant a seed in the dirt, you can't see the harvest yet, it is literally unseen, but you have iman, rational conviction that if you water it and tend to the soil, the harvest will eventually come. That future result is the unseen.
That is really grounded. It takes all the spooky factor out of religion. Okay, what about Salah? That's the big one. Prayer, 5 times a day. It's the core pillar of Islam for most people.
This is probably the most controversial redefinition in his entire body of work. Traditionally, Salah is the daily ritual worship, bowing, prostrating, reciting verses. In the systemic view, the Quranic phrase, ikomat as-salah, doesn't mean to pray. It translates to establishment of the system.
Establishment of the system. So what does that mean for the guy just kneeling on his prayer rug at home?
The implication is massive. Pervez argues you cannot legally perform Salah alone in a room.
You can't. But millions of people do it all the time.
You can perform the physical ritual, sure, but you are not fulfilling the actual command because you cannot establish a government system alone in your bedroom. It is inherently a collective state-level function. It implies setting up the infrastructure of justice, managing the economy, enforcing the laws of the deen.
So when the Quran says establish chant, Salah Pervez actually reads it as build the state.
Yes. Implement the Constitution. It transforms the believer from a passive monk into an active citizen soldier or a civil servant.
Wow. Okay, next one, Akhirat, the hereafter, heaven and hell.
Traditionally, this is entirely post-death. You die, you get judged, you go up or down. In the systemic view, it centers entirely on the law of requital.
Law of requital.
Cause and effect. Every single action has an inevitable consequence. The hereafter begins right now. It's just the future that follows the present moment.
So hell isn't just a literal pit of fire you go to when you die.
In this view, hell is a society of poverty, servitude, and rampant injustice. If you allow hunger to exist in your city, you are already living in hell. That is hell on earth, which eventually leads to spiritual ruin. Heaven is a society of dignity and material sufficiency. The timeline extends from this life continuously into the next, but the mechanics are continuous. If you build a bad system, you live in hell today.
It's very immediate. It puts the responsibility right back on us. You can't just shrug and say, well, life sucks.
Yeah.
At least I'll go to heaven eventually.
Exactly. It completely removes the escapism of religion. You can't just wait for heaven. You have to actively build it here.
And the last one, which I found really interesting, is shirk, polytheism. Usually this means worshiping stone idols.
Right.
Or praying to more than one god.
Right. But in the system view, shirk is defined as political fragmentation.
Political fragmentation. How do you get from worshiping idols to politics?
Think about the logic of the state. If there is one sovereign God and one constitution, the Quran, then there should logically be one unified community. If you split into sects, Sunni, Shia, Wahhabi, Sufi, you are actively creating competing authorities. You are following different sets of laws. You are effectively creating different substates within the state.
So sectarianism is polytheism.
According to Pervez, yes, absolutely. Dividing the unified constitution into competing sects is the exact political equivalent of worshiping multiple gods. It fractures the absolute sovereignty of the state.
That is a very heavy charge to lay at the feet of the Muslim world, considering just how deeply sectarian it is today. He is basically calling the entire religious establishment polytheists.
It's a direct, unblinking indictment. He's saying that by being sectarian, you are actively violating the very oneness of the system itself.
Now, we really need to zoom out a bit. We touched on this earlier with Gandhi and Azad, but we really need to understand the atmosphere in which Pervez was actually writing all this down. He wasn't just sitting in a quiet ivory tower making up theories. There was a literal political fire burning outside his window.
Absolutely. You cannot separate these theological ideas from the pre-partition crisis in India. We're talking about the 1930s and 40s. The British Empire is exhausted and on its way out. The singular question on everyone's mind is what happens when they finally leave.
And for Muslims in India, that was a deeply scary question.
It was terrifying for many. They were a minority, a very large minority, but still a minority. The fear was that in a fully democratic, independent India, the Hindu majority would just naturally dominate every aspect of life. Politics, culture, economics.
So you had two main camps of Muslim thinkers trying to solve this, right?
Roughly, yes. You had the nationalist Muslims who were aligned with the Congress Party, led by figures like Abul Kalam Azad. They desperately wanted a composite nationalism, a unified India where Hindus, Muslims, Sikhs, and Christians all live together under a secular or multi-religious constitution.
And their main argument was that unity of religions concept we talked about earlier. Our God is the same. Our core values are the same. Let's just live together peacefully.
Right. Azad argued that the Quranic message was inherently universal. He looked at the long history of India, the mixing of the cultures, the shared poetry, the food, and said, we can do this. We don't need to separate.
And Pervez looked at this exact same picture and saw a complete nightmare.
He saw an existential threat to Islam itself. He critiqued this composite nationalism fiercely. He believed that if Muslims accepted the unity of religions idea, they would inevitably lose their system.
Because if Islam's just a religion of private rituals, it can exist literally anywhere. You can pray in India, you can pray in China, you can pray on the moon. It doesn't matter who runs the government.
Exactly. If Islam is just mazhab, you don't need a state. But if Islam is a deen, a comprehensive state system, it absolutely needs its own territory. It needs hardware to run on. You cannot run an operating system just in your head. You need a physical computer.
And Pakistan was meant to be that computer.
That was the core argument. Pervez and the thinkers aligned with the All India Muslim League argued that without a separate sovereign state, the operating system could never be installed. And if it couldn't be installed, the pragmatic test could never be run.
He calls it a slippery slope, right?
Oh.
He looked at history for proof.
He did. He pointed directly to the Bhakti movement, or Emperor Akbar's Din-e-Ilahi. These were historical attempts to blend Hinduism and Islam together. He argued that whenever this blending happened, Islam got absorbed. He feared Muslims would eventually just become another caste within Hinduism, just like Buddhism was largely absorbed into Hinduism in India centuries prior.
So redefining Islam as a deen, a state system, wasn't just an abstract theology. It was the intellectual engine for the creation of Pakistan.
It was the ultimate justification for separatism. It provided a modern political reason for why Muslims could not live under a non-Muslim majority. Not because they hated Hindus personally, but because they had an entirely different constitution that they were mandated to implement.
That puts the creation of Pakistan in a very different light for me. It wasn't just we want to be safe from riots. It was we want a blank canvas to run an experiment.
Exactly. It was supposed to be the ultimate laboratory for the deen.
So bringing this all back to you, the listener, the big so what? Why does this matter to someone listening today? Maybe someone who isn't even Muslim or someone who is, but has never heard this specific theory before.
I think the biggest implication here is the challenge of system versus self. We live in an era of extreme individualism today.
We really do. We are obsessed with my truth, my personal spiritual journey, my inner peace. Self-care is practically the new global religion.
But this worldview aggressively rejects all of that. It says your private spirituality is basically meaningless if the system you live in creates hunger and fear for others. It says you are not an island.
It effectively removes the cozy comfort of just being privately good.
It does. You can't just be good in private. If you are a nice person who pays your taxes in a system that crushes the poor, are you actually righteous? Pervez would say, no, you aren't. You are complicit. You are the driver on the right side of the road, thinking you're a saint while causing a massive pileup behind you.
It forces you to look at the actual results.
Yeah.
It forces you to look at society as a litmus test for truth.
It's the ultimate accountability. Look at your city. Look at your country. Is there hunger? Is there fear? If yes, then the operating system is deeply flawed. It doesn't matter how many beautiful temples or churches or mosques you build, the output is wrong.
And for the Quran specifically, for the believer who holds that book.
It changes it from a holy relic that you kiss and put on a high shelf or chant for mystical blessings into a literal rule book, a manual. In this framework, the Quran is not for chanting, it's for governance. It's for executing code in the real world.
Yeah, it's a radical shift. Let's quickly recap this journey because we've covered a massive amount of ground today.
We started with the core conflict, mazhab religion versus Deen's system. Mazhab is subjective, ritualistic, and focused on the afterlife. Deen is objective, systemic, and entirely focused on results in this life.
We looked at the traffic law analogy, the idea that you can't be a good citizen if you ignore the public law no matter how nice you are privately.
We analyzed verse 2.62, seeing it not as a warm validation of all religions, but as an open, exclusive invitation to join the only valid constitution.
We discussed the pragmatic test, the laboratory society. If there is hunger, the system is false. Period.
And we looked at the massive political stakes, how this idea fueled the creation of a separate state to preserve the system against absorption in India.
It leaves us with a pretty provocative final thought.
It really does. I want the listener to focus on that law of requital we talked about. The idea that society is a strict laboratory of cause and effect.
Because if we take Pervez's theory as true,
if we accept his premise that the Deen guarantees success, dignity, and the total end of hunger, then we have to look objectively at the Muslim world today.
Which is often facing severe poverty, instability, internal violence, and fear.
Exactly. If the laboratory is currently producing explosions and failure, then according to this very source material, that is scientific proof.
Proof of what exactly?
Proof that they are not actually practicing the Deen, despite the millions of mosques, despite the billions of daily prayers, despite all the intense religious fervor. Pervez would argue the hard data shows they are just practicing mazhab. They're running the wrong operating system.
That is a haunting thought. It suggests that the most outwardly religious societies might actually be the furthest away from the system. If faith is truly measured by social outcomes, how much faith does our modern world actually have?
That is the ultimate question.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. It's certainly given me a lot to think about regarding the difference between what we just believe and what we actually build.
Always a pleasure to be here.
See you next time.